Hey, everybody, welcome back to Practical Liberty. Today's going to be a fun episode. Let's face it, over the past 3 or so years, all of us have thought, screw this place, I should move to Mexico. But logistically, it kind of seems overwhelming. Well, my guest today actually made that move. She was a classically trained musician, and now she's an expat that helps other people figure out how to relocate, among other things. And that is Tracy Friedlander. How you doing, Tracy?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks.
Thanks for coming on. This is fun. So we met a few weeks ago at Kevin Rogers' Mastermind event,
Yeah.
and you just had a really interesting story, and I thought it would make a great episode of the podcast. So could you kind of tell people before we get to the relocation part, just what your life was like, say 5 years ago before you made this big jump?
Yeah. Okay. So 5 years ago was when I was just getting into online marketing. Before that, I had literally no other skills besides playing the French horn, which is unfortunately not a skill that many people all over the world need all the time. So I was performing and playing in an orchestra almost full time and freelancing. So I was doing other gigs as well, but with mainly with one orchestra. And then I had my daughter in 2010. And that was when I was like, yeah, this traveling thing and being out late at night playing concerts doesn't work for me anymore. So I started to think, like, what else can I do? But the problem was, I really didn't have much other skills. I liked writing, but it never occurred to me that I could do it. And I literally knew nothing about online marketing, copywriting, didn't even know what that word was. And so in 2016, I got back in touch with a good friend of mine that I knew from youth orchestra, and she had left music. She knew a lot earlier on that that career path was not going to get her a lot of money, not going to really lead to a lot of career stability generally at first. So she just left and she went into the business world and she became a copywriter. She did all kinds of online endeavors. And when we got back in touch, I told her that I was not really happy in my career and that I didn't know what to do about it. And she said, well, she happened to be a business coach at that time. So that was really convenient. She was
Yeah.
like, let's work together and I'll teach you everything I know. And of course, I was really into that idea. So I jumped in, you know, I dove in head first. And as a musician, we kind of most people that I know, at least in this field, they take it really seriously. Like, I am going to be the best and I'll do whatever it takes to do that, even if I have to practice 4 hours a day. So I sort of took that approach with writing, and boy, did I suck at first. I was turning in things to her and she'd be like, okay, but this sounds like a book report from eighth grade. So I really had to, open myself up to a lot of criticism and just tearing apart my writing. But it paid off because by the time um, you know, she helped me in 2016, and then I ended up starting a podcast and doing all the promoting for that myself once I got the hang of what it's like to write promotionally. And so I started doing that just for myself. And then I started building a career, a business, a coaching business. It felt weird to me to say that because I'm like, a coach? Why I'm going to coach people, but after 4 years of promoting my podcast and talking about my opinions in the classical music space, which was actually something nobody does in classical music. They don't really share their opinions. They'll tell you secretly if they're upset about something, but there's a lot of fears around, like, don't say the wrong thing or you might lose your jobs and stuff. So I was kind of a pioneer in that way, like just saying what I wanted to say about the industry, which most of the time was kind of negative. And then I started teaching other people how to grow an audience online. So how to post on Facebook and start your Instagram account and start an email list, essentially.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of copywriters are musicians in some way or other.
I've noticed that.
Yeah, I think part of it is the creativity. We like to make things sound pretty, right? Words sound pretty or instruments sound pretty. I played guitar a little bit growing up. I played saxophone. I never really liked the saxophone. Um, but there's something about the discipline of learning an instrument that translates over to learning writing because you
Yes.
do have to practice a lot.
Yeah.
So and I don't know. There's something about those. I haven't figured out the exact connection between music and writing. It might just be the sounds, but
I think it's something else. I think it's the mastery. I think it's reaching a level of mastery because I felt like I reached that with the horn, but unfortunately, when you reach that level of mastery with the horn or any other instrument, and if you're doing it professionally, your reward is like maybe a six-figure a year salary and not a lot of opportunities for growth. Whereas like in writing, if you reach mastery like you did, your possibilities for income are endless. So I think, but I do think that's the common denominator.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think there's probably something to that. I would agree. So let's fast forward a little bit. What
Yeah.
prompted your move down to Mexico?
So basically, March 2020, when everything came to a halt. And luckily, I mean, I thank God that I was already working online because I could show that I had income online when we applied for visas. But and I was sort of inching my way out of performing. I was still performing out, but I was only taking gigs I really liked because I had I had already started creating some online income, so I could say no to the ones I didn't want, So I'd only play like the ballet gigs I liked, some of the opera stuff, and then I could turn down those church gigs or whatever I didn't want to do. But March 2020 came and all concerts were canceled everywhere. And so that was good for my business at first, right? Because all of a sudden all the musicians said, "Oh, I've never built an online audience. I've never created an offer. I probably should do that," because every single source of income just dried up. Even students wouldn't come to people's houses.
Right.
So they had to figure out online lessons right away. So it was like something that was never online suddenly became everyone did that. So I was helping people with that. And then you and I agree on a lot of government stuff, which is why I'm happy to be here. I started to see what was going on and I was like, let's get out of here. If my husband thought I was totally crazy when I said it, but I was following Jeff Berwick online. He's really into the crypto markets and stuff. And really the reason why he likes crypto so much is because it's not government money, right? So he was putting out content like that and I was watching it, and he lives in Mexico and he was talking about how great Mexico is. And it started to get into my head. And we already had friends living here. So one day I brought it up. I said to my husband, "Hey, let's move to Mexico." He thought I was completely nuts, but we did it.
So did your husband have an income that he could pick up and move to, or did he have more of a struggle there?
It was more of a struggle for him. Excuse me. He was already teaching online, but a majority of his income was performing. So he had been with the symphony for like 15 years and he had never taken a leave of absence. And that's allowed. Every 7 years you can leave unpaid and just do whatever you want. And so a lot of people take that advantage of that every 7 years. Maybe they go teach somewhere or they just take a break. But he had never done that. So I said, this is the perfect time to do this. Get away from this BS and not deal with their like flaming pile of garbage that they're dealing with, and let's just leave. And so he agreed to it, and he was teaching all of his students online. And that was the year he's not as much of an entrepreneur at heart as I am. So it took some nudging to say, like, you could create an offer, you could create a masterclass series. He did that. He invited on all these like world-class musicians that all their gigs were canceled, so they were free and they could come
Yeah.
on Zoom and teach these classes. So he did that, and it's been a process of getting him like more used to it. But he really loves, like, his schedule has just freed up so much. He used to be on the road all the time. So it's just so much better because the cost of living here is, I would say, 50% less, but not for like a worse way of life at all.
Do you mind
So
sharing where you relocated to?
sure. We're in Lake Chapala area, so it's about 45 minutes south of Guadalajara. So we have the big city and the Costco and everything we need, but we're like more in the mountains, sort of in a little countryside town.
I mean, that sounds romantic to me.
It is romantic. I look out my window every day. I'm like, what? I get to live here. I see mountains with like clouds sort of mist over the clouds in the mountains every day. And it's just gorgeous. And we have a huge lake this way with mountains on the other side and then mountains on this side. It's
Oh
just
man,
amazing.
send me pictures and I'll upload them so people can see on the YouTube version what we're
Okay,
talking about.
I
Uh,
will.
so let's talk about the logistics of it, because I think that's the part that scares off a lot of
Yeah,
people, especially with our kind of mentality, where we're looking at what the government's done the last 3 years essentially and saying these people have lost their minds and they're willing to go to any extent, and I got to get out of here. But
yeah,
all my friends are here. I don't know what the visa process is. I don't speak the language. So
right.
what were the biggest adjustments that you had to make? And like, I guess let's start with the logistics. Like, what was
Okay.
it like to make that move originally?
Okay. So first, it was mostly just settling in on that we are going to do this. This is
Mhm.
happening. It's going to happen on this date, because I think that it's really easy to say, oh, maybe someday I'll do that. So the first step is really just deciding, okay, this is happening and picking a place. And for me, it was easy because I already had friends that live here. So I said, why should we pick anywhere else? We have friends who can help us get adjusted, who can help us find a house and all those other logistics. So that was really helpful. Um, but the first step really is once you decide is you have to get a visa that allows you to live here. And it's called a temporary visa, and you can apply at any Mexican consulate in the United States. And you have to prove that you have when at the time that we applied, we only had to prove like $35,000 a year income. So it's
Wow.
really like it's a low bar to get it to
And that's
get.
mobile income. Like, you have to prove that you can
Yeah.
make that. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, because they don't want people coming and like getting a job here.
Yeah. It's funny. They're worried about Americans stealing jobs, just like a lot of Americans are worried about Mexican immigrants stealing jobs. It's
Exactly. Isn't that
the
funny?
world. The world's the same everywhere.
Yeah. And so you can apply for permanent residency if you have a lot more money than that. Like say you have 150,000 in the bank or if you can prove that you're retired and you have consistent income for the rest of your life, you can immediately apply for permanent. But we didn't have that, so we did temporary. So temporary, you can stay for 4 years and then you can apply for permanent after that. And the other thing that gets you permanent residency is if you buy property. So if you come down here if you come down here on a visitor's visa, and which you can just come here, you don't need to apply for that. You automatically cross the border and you have 6 months to stay here, which is pretty cool. And I think a lot of people do that and then they just figure it out after, which I don't think is totally legal. But then again, it's Mexico, so you can't really get in trouble, I don't think. But if you're here spending money, I think the government's happy.
Yeah, I
So
imagine.
yeah, so you can come here and buy a place and then you immediately get permanent residency. Um, so we did that and that was stressful because, at that time I didn't know if they were going to close the borders, which they never did. Mexico was one of the only countries that never closed their borders during COVID. So I thought that was amazing because there was always that fear, like, oh, it's going to happen. And in the news, they would even say that they were, but they never were. It was a lie every time because I would go and
Mm.
ask my friends, and they're like, no, or the land borders are closed. And then I meet tons of people here that just drove right over. And sometimes a lot of times people, they forgot to check their passports. So they would just drive over and be like, wait a second, are we in Mexico already? I didn't even know. So it's funny, all the stuff you find out when you move here. But so we got the visas just in the nick of time. I was watching the flight, like the costs, like the prices of flights, and we only had to buy a one-way ticket. And I was watching the prices and they started to go up a little. And I said, okay, we have to just book these and hope that the visas come before that. And so I bought three one-way first class tickets because I had all these airline miles from not traveling for years. And we booked first class one-way tickets. We brought our dog and 6 suitcases and a bike bag, and that's it.
Wow.
One-way ticket. Yeah.
And
It,
did you have the residence where you were going to stay set up already beforehand?
yes, my friend found a place and she was like, how does this look? She showed me pictures. And I'm like, yeah, that's great. And it was like maybe a mile away from the school. So we have a daughter, she's 12. When we moved here, she was 10. And my friend did all this legwork for me. She found out about this really great Waldorf school here. And I met the director of the school online and she was like, yeah, just come meet us. I was like, where do I pay? Where do I sign up? She was like, just come over when you get here. I was like, oh, that makes me nervous. But she was so amazing, this woman. So amazing. She kept the school open during the whole time. She even like painted over the sign so people wouldn't know it was a school so that she could keep schooling her kids. And that's the level that it got to, where kids were really uh, going off on a tangent a little bit, where kids are like, oh, you have to stay home. That's so bad for kids.
Oh, it's
You know?
terrible. Yeah, it's what they did over here in
Yeah.
in this country
Yeah.
is just it's straight up child abuse for the
I
most part.
agree.
And it's unforgivable, really.
Totally.
But so it's actually an interesting point. So the Mexican government is kind of known for corruption. They're bought off by cartels allegedly. That you can bribe officials, but in the U.S., our officials they're not better people.
No.
Their corruption is just more clandestine. right? They don't
Right.
they try to hide it a little better. And I'd
Yeah,
actually, there's some benefit to living in the openly corrupt
I agree.
with people that are openly corrupt. Like it's all on the table. You know what you're dealing with. Whereas here, it's like it's selective corruption, right?
Yeah, you have to watch the documentary and find out that, this FDA person used to work for Pfizer or whatever, like, that kind of payoff. It looks a little different, but here, I think the benefit is that generally I feel that the Mexican people have a deep distrust for government. And so I feel like that's a really big difference between Mexico and the United States, where so many people still do everything the government says.
So I brought up the cartels briefly. What is, I know that's one of the big fears, is
Yeah,
because our
yeah,
our media up here plays up anytime there's violence. That there's drug dealer movies that center
yeah.
on that. So what is the actual situation on the ground? Like, do you see violence in the streets on a daily basis?
No.
Yeah.
No, but you know that they're around. You can tell when there's cartel around, because they're the ones with, like, Mercedes, or Land Rovers are popular. Like the Range Rover, the sleek white Range Rover is a popular
Yeah.
vehicle. You can see some of the, or even ridiculous. Like, one time I was at this high end mall. There was that Audi sports car, like sleek, low riding Audi sport. Like, you just see these things and you're like, that's definitely not an average citizen. And so you see that sometimes there'll be, like, one time since we've been here, we saw sort of a chase situation where the cops were going super fast down the highway. And then you hear later that they were catching somebody in the, like, three towns over or something. But that was once in 2.5 years. So
It's not like there's not violence in America. I was talking to
exactly.
a friend that still lives in Philadelphia, and he works downtown, and he saw a shooting in broad daylight in downtown Philadelphia. He watched
Oh my
somebody
gosh.
there, two people got in a fight over a parking spot, and one of them pulled out a gun and shot the other guy in the face. And
Oh my God.
that's in the streets of America right now. So like,
Right.
I think the prejudice against the Mexican violence is a little, it's played up, and it's understandable in a way, just based on psychology. Well, that's foreign thing, and
Yeah.
we have this idea of Mexico as a poor, like, third world country almost in a lot of people's minds,
Yeah.
and it's that's not the reality on the ground that I've
No,
seen
it's
or heard
definitely not.
related.
It's definitely not. It's definitely not. And I will say too, another difference between the violence in the US and the violence here is that the violence is large. I'm not going to say there's no violence outside of cartel violence. There certainly is, but mostly they're targeting each other. It's like a cartel fight, or it's some guy who went rogue and they're going after him. And they very rarely do, is it like just civilians. I've never heard a story where somebody like shot somebody in the face over a parking spot. Like, that just doesn't happen. People are so laid back here, unbelievably laid back, to the point that if you aren't even a little bit laid back, you shouldn't consider moving here. Because, like, you'll be in traffic and you'll realize the guy 5 cars in front of you is unloading some concrete bags in front of the store. And everyone's just like, I'll look at the people in the cars because I'm just fascinated by the fact that they're just hanging out waiting, you know? And because I lived in Chicago for 10 years. Like, if the cars stop even for a second, everyone's honking, get the hell out of my way. So, but yeah, the violence really happens within the cartel. So at least that's what I've seen and what I've heard, that the cartel really, and they really have concern for the citizens. Is I'm not trying to paint them as like good guys, but they're not going to let something happen like that's going to get other people hurt, you know?
It's actually one of the points. It might have been Thaddeus Russell's book, The Renegade History of the United States. He was talking about the mafia in Chicago and New York, and they really kept their own neighborhood safe. There was a lot of
Yeah.
violence, but it was, mafia on mafia violence that got all the attention. And they want the populace to be happy. They don't want it to,
Yes.
because that's, if you lose the support of the people, you lose your power, essentially, which is
Exactly.
something our government never seems to care about.
Exactly. Exactly. And I will say there is I just saw this on a video recently. There's a town called Merida, which is in the Yucatan Peninsula, and it's supposed to be so cute and like colonial architecture and everything, and it's about 30 minutes away from the beach. Large expat population there. It's supposed to be the safest city, maybe one of the safest cities in the world. And the theory, I don't know if it's true, but the theory is that the cartels decided this is a safe zone, and maybe there's no path around it for any drug movement. So this is like apparently a safe zone, and there's never any violence there. But I'm sure you can't say there's never any violence there, but it has been deemed the safest city. So if that's a super big concern, you could always go there.
Yeah, I remember I went to Cabo, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, and everybody, there was a bunch of guys on the trip, and some of them are like, "Well, what about the cartels?" And they're like, "Yeah, they don't mess with the tourist areas at all.
Right.
That is the local
That's true.
economy, and they're not going to let that, you know."
Exactly. And some of them are their businesses, like these big resorts, for sure they're cartel owned, some of them, you
So
know.
another concern I think people have, I think we've pretty well put the violence down to bed, but the language barrier.
Yes,
Americans are not good at second languages, much less third languages, like most
that's
of the
true.
world. So, how big of a deal is it if you don't speak Spanish? And are there places to learn? How much do you need to learn? What's the
Yeah.
language situation down there?
Yeah. So this is a big question everybody has. I feel like it's always good to go and try and learn a language if you don't speak it when you're living in someone else's country. So yeah, and there's so many opportunities to learn. People are teaching Spanish at in ridiculously affordable prices. Like you can get a lesson in person for like 7, $8. That's really great. But so I studied Spanish in high school, and so when I got here, I had it in my brain, and I've been working on getting it to the point where I can have conversations, and that really helps. Like if you can just know some basic, if you can order in a restaurant, I mean, which is pretty basic.
Yeah.
Order in a restaurant, it just it gives you more peace of mind if you can do things like go pay a bill, go ask for directions, or ask a question in a store. So there's certain things that I really think it'll help you if you know it. But there are tons of people who move here and they never learn Spanish and they're doing okay because there's areas where there's a lot of English speakers.
If you're in the process of learning, so I come down and I have the intention of learning, but I don't know,
Yeah.
and I have very basic Spanglish down just from some of my high school experience. I had a large portion of my high school spoke. It was Puerto Rican and Mexican mostly.
Okay.
So I learned a little bit there, but mostly swear words. So I don't.
That's good.
Yeah, but I don't know that I want to come into a restaurant and bust out my entire vocabulary. So how much? I guess how much leeway do they give you while you're learning? Like, do they correct you? Like, is it kind of that immersion experience where they'll correct you, or is it like when I go to France? I've been to France several times. And I try to speak French, and they just look at me with the most condescending look and speak in English to me. Like,
Yeah.
don't
That
even
does
bother.
that does not happen here. They're so happy if you speak butchered Spanish. They're just happy you're trying for real. Like, and so many people have told me when I speak Spanish to them, thank you for speaking Spanish. I've met so many people here who have no interest in learning Spanish, so they just come here and they speak English all the time. And I really appreciate it when people speak Spanish. So they're super kind about it. And if they don't speak English, I see all kinds of like sign language type things going on. They're super kind people, Mexicans. I To the point where you're like, you're too nice. At least, and I'll tell you what, outside of the cities, always. If you go
Yeah.
to Guadalajara, Mexico City, there are going to be less English speakers and there probably will be less helpful. Like they just assume you speak Spanish, so they just speak Spanish to you. But if you try, they're always accommodating,
I,
always.
I feel like that's the same scenario in the States. Is if you're in a
Yeah.
city, it's a little more tense, it's a little
Yeah.
ruder. I moved from Philadelphia out to the countryside, and it's hard to meet mean people out here. I mean, you can find some rednecks that don't want anything to do with you, but for the most
Yeah.
part, it's if you're out here and you're not judging people for their culture or their beliefs, they're
Yep.
perfectly fine with you, which is not the same in the city. You go in the city,
Exactly.
redneck goes in the city, and it's like, what are you doing here, you hick? Like, how dare you try to eat in a
Totally.
classy restaurant? You
Totally.
belong in the sticks. So it's like that everywhere, but it sounds like
But I don't know.
yeah,
Oh, sorry to interrupt you. I don't know if you've noticed this in the States, but it's also with government rules and stuff like that. In the city, people are much more rule followers than in the
yeah.
in the in the countryside. So I think that's pretty interesting. Like if you're a freedom seeking person, you might not be as happy in, downtown Mexico City versus like somewhere more rural where you might find a lot more like-minded people, you know.
So, what is the expat community like? Are there, I guess, if you're thinking about relocating, are there different areas you should look at? Are there different
Yeah.
areas you should definitely avoid? Like, how would you go about deciding on what location? Like, let's say somebody doesn't have a friend that happens to live in a town they're considering moving to, like
Right.
you did.
Right. Well, I'm happy to be your friend in Mexico. That's my website, a friend in Mexico.
Oh, nice.
Um, yeah. But yeah, if they should look at definitely the Lake Chapala area, because all the places with the biggest expat populations are ideal because you can find a group of people. You can find people like on Facebook. There's groups everywhere of like just Lake Chapala gringos or whatever. Or San Miguel de Allende is another town with a lot of expats. Puerto Vallarta is a great one if you want to live by the beach. A lot of people live in the Tulum area, which is more of like a party scene, but people, I think, people who don't necessarily party all the time live there too. But those are the main ones. And Merida, which I already mentioned, those are like the top gringo hotspots, essentially. And then you can venture off into some other areas. Oaxaca is really nice in the south. It's always nice to live near a place with an international airport because when you do want to go home, it's pretty quick in most places. Like from Guadalajara to Dallas, it's only a 2 hour flight. So, and then from Dallas, you can go anywhere. So I find that like the thing of, oh, am I going to be far from home? It doesn't feel much different than living in like California if your family's on the East Coast. But, but there is definitely like, you can meet a lot of expats and a lot of the people are escapees, like people who left Canada when things got really nuts there and they got out like right before certain mandates happened. And then they got here. I've even met Australians who got out and then but you meet all different kinds of people. You meet people who moved here 10, 20 years ago. So it's not necessarily because of what's happening right now.
Yeah, that's funny that some Australians actually escaped before they got locked
Yeah.
in. Uh,
Yeah.
I have a friend that um, her husband is Australian and he hasn't been able to visit his family for 3 years. And it's actually not because of the Australians. He was unable to take the vaccine due to some reactions, and it's that America won't let him back in.
Oh, for a connecting flight.
Well, because he hasn't had 2 doses of the vaccine, he's not allowed back in via without being an American citizen. American citizens can always get back in, but if you're not
Yeah.
an American citizen yet, if you're just a green card holder, you might not get back in. So,
Wow. So where does he live?
down south, he just hasn't been able to go home.
Oh, okay. Oh, he's in the States, but he knows he can't come back.
Yes,
Right.
exactly.
Okay.
So technology issues are another concern I think that people have.
Right.
So what's the internet like? What's the cell service like? Is it
Right.
how dramatically different is it than America, or is it pretty much gonna feel like you're just different scenery?
Okay. Internet, the only drastic difference is the price is about a third of the cost for just as good of internet. Seriously, I have cable. I mean, not cable. I have fiber internet, and it's phenomenal. It's great. Okay, knock on wood because I don't want us to drop a call right now. But I pay like 35 a month for it.
Wow, yeah, that is a
Same.
third of what I pay.
Yeah. And then cell phones are so cheap. I pay like, I don't know, $15 a month. And actually on the website, it said, we recommend you go for the $10 a month plan because you're not using all of your data. Because 15 a month is, I think, 4 GB, which is what I used to have on my T-Mobile plan in the States that I paid like, I don't know, 64, 40 or 50 or 60. I don't remember because, it was all lumped together with my husband's phone, but it's a lot cheaper. The difference though, well, I have an old iPhone XR. It's not a 5G phone. So maybe there's some connectivity there that's not happening because I have an old phone. But so we always have 4G in this area. And sometimes it'll go to 3G and sometimes it will be off for a few hours, but that's very rare. For the most part, you can use your phone just like you use it. And when I go back to the States, my phone works just fine on that same plan. So
So
it's just,
texting and calling is going to be the same. Maybe you have
yeah,
slower video downloads or something.
yeah. But you're on Wi Fi most of the time. So yeah, it's a little harder if you want to download something when you're out. And we use WhatsApp way more. Like, this from probably being traveling, is that everybody uses WhatsApp except for in the US. So
Yeah.
that was one adjustment I had to make because I used to just use the messaging app from Apple. So, but that's not a big deal. I actually like that app better.
There's some privacy concerns with that app, but
What about the end-to-end encryption? No?
yeah, apparently not.
Fake.
I did an episode, I don't know, a couple months ago at this point with Glenn Meter, who's
Okay.
a privacy expert. He recommends Signal. I think it would have the same functionality.
I use
Um,
Signal too, but not everybody's on it. So
yeah, that's the thing. You always have to sacrifice some privacy. Just when you need to talk to somebody, sometimes you need to talk to them. So
I
yeah.
keep Signal for stuff I want to complain about, government stuff. Like if I really want to say something bad, I'll just do it on Signal.
So what were the biggest surprises when you got down there?
Let's see. You know, surprise, I don't know, it's hard to say because I think one of the biggest surprises is that it's really not that different.
Yeah.
Does that is that a dumb surprise? Like it doesn't feel like you're that out of the country that much,
It's just so
besides the language.
yeah, the language is the only, and the friendliness.
And the friendly, and I think the biggest surprise, maybe cobblestones. There's a lot of cobblestone streets, so you really have to watch where you're walking. Um, one of the things is that you go to like a fruit market and then you go to like a fish market or a meat market. It's kind of separate, but you can also go to Walmart. So if you really don't want that experience, there's a Walmart grocery store. A big surprise is Walmart is not as scuzzy as it is in the States. It's actually nicer. Because I hated Walmart with a passion when I was in the States. And I mean, I don't necessarily like that company, but it's a more modern shopping experience than like the fruit market or whatever. So that's kind of a little bit of a surprise, but really it's not that much different.
One of the big warnings I always got, and I've only been to Mexico, I think 3 times, but everybody always told me don't drink the water. Is that a concern? Like,
Yes,
okay, so you
that's
bottle.
true. Yeah. So um when I was living in the States though, I always got my water from Whole Foods because I don't like tap water at all.
Okay,
So that wasn't even a adjustment for me. But yes, if you're used to just filling up a glass from the tap, you definitely cannot do that here. But some people get high level filtration systems in their house, so they can. The problem isn't that it has parasites in it or anything like that, although I should mention parasites in a second. The problem with the water is that it has a high level of minerals that your body can't absorb, and so it can cause kidney problems.
uh, so
So
if I is you need more than just like a Brita filter.
yeah, yeah, but you get it delivered to your house in 5 gallon jugs, and it's like $1 a jug, so or $1.25 a jug. So they just deliver you reverse osmosis water, and I have like 8 of them in my laundry room, so I never run out. And the guy comes by once a week and just trades you the empty ones for the full ones. So it's really pretty easy, but it's a added thing.
That's a small adjustment then.
Yeah.
All right. What about, so you're running an online business down there. So I'm
Yes.
assuming you get paid mostly by clients in the States that are paying you in dollars. Is there any
Yes.
problem with, I don't know, the currency exchange? Does that affect your life at all? Like what is the process there for, I guess, running a business, getting paid, using money?
That was an adjustment too. And now that I think about it, there are a couple of things in this realm that are an adjustment, a big adjustment. Like when I paid my car insurance recently and they didn't have a website where I could just go in and pay. Like I had to try to do a bank transfer and my bank is super secure, which is a good thing, but it kept not letting me pay. So then I had to like go to my bank, have them call for me because there's certain things I don't love doing in Spanish. One of them is talking to customer service on the phone. I just don't my level of Spanish isn't there yet. So that's kind of a pain. But with banks and getting paid in dollars and everything, that's really not a problem. But it does take a little while to just figure out your plan. So you could just stick your ATM card in, but that's where you're going to get the most fees because
Right.
this is a very cash-based society. You pull out, $200 or $300 a week and you're spending it on everywhere. Because unless you're living in the city where it's more like the States, Guadalajara, you can go and do your card everywhere. But in the smaller towns, no, it's really cash based, and they really want you to pay cash because they don't want to pay taxes. So, so, so I worked out a little system for myself, which was the cheapest possible fees because you're always going to pay fees when you're moving currencies,
Mm-hmm.
but you have to just research. And I got a bank that has a great system where they have a bank in the States and you have to I do a domestic transfer to their US Chase account, and then they move it to the pesos for a fee which they kind of bake into their exchange rate. So I don't really know exactly what their fee is, but it's not a bad exchange rate. And compared to like TransferWise and those kind of things, it's like at least $20 cheaper if you're moving like 5,000 bucks. If you move like 10,000, you're going to save even more money. But I did a little comparison at the beginning of the week because one of my friends was like, "Oh yeah, TransferWise is so great," but I looked and it's really not the best fee wise.
Okay, but it's not. So actually, talking about the currency, is inflation a problem in Mexico? Like it is, like the British pound. Excuse me, the British pound is kind of collapsing. A lot of
Yeah.
currencies around the world are having, especially compared to the dollar, they're not doing that well. How's the peso? It is the peso, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. How's that holding up against, I guess, the dollar? What's inflation like? What's the economic situation, I guess, in Mexico right now?
Okay, so the exchange rate has stayed between the mid 19.5 pesos to a dollar to 21, 22. When we got here and bought a car, it was 22, so we got a really good deal on our car. But after that, it's hovered around upper 19 to 20 pesos per dollar. And so I think it feels like it seems pretty stable. I think probably because of the dollar relationship and all the dollars going back and forth between Mexico. But yeah, so it's stayed pretty stable. Inflation, I have seen prices go up since I've been here. The good thing is that they were already so low to begin with that it didn't make so much of a difference. Like if your taco used to be 65 cents and now it's 70 cents, you could still buy a taco, you know? So
Yeah.
it's not exorbitant. I think it's harder for Mexicans though, for sure. I've heard that. And another thing that makes it harder for Mexicans to live in expat communities is their rent keeps going up because they know the landlords know they can get higher rent from expats than they can
Right.
from. So there are definitely, you can see like, oh, this community rent is like 1500 US. Like that is out of the question for a Mexican family in most cases. They're
What are you
looking,
getting? What are you getting for that 1500?
we have a 3 bedroom, 3 bath kind of townhome. It's a house, but it shares one wall and it's inside of a gated community with a pool, super modern, lots of windows. It's really pretty. And our place is interior designed by someone professional. Like it's really nice compared to some of the other houses in here. Our owner went overboard with the design, so it's really nice.
Yeah, that's still pretty cheap.
Yeah.
I'm in a pretty rural community right now, and it's 20-minute drive to the grocery store, 25-minute drive, and I have some neighbors that are renting a 3 bedroom for 2200 a month.
Wow.
So, and this is rural, like Pennsylvania, so it's not.
Wow.
You go into Philadelphia and you're paying 3500 for that. So I mean, compared to a lot of other places, that's still pretty cheap.
And you want to when you come down as an expat, you're going to want to pay around that price because you're going to have just better quality like plumbing and stuff like that, you know. If you go in you're like I want to pay $800 for a house, it might be a situation where you can't throw the toilet paper in the toilet, which
Hmm.
Americans do not want to do that. It's gross. But yeah, so I've always rented places where that stuff is at a higher level. So I don't have to
Yeah,
because that would be a culture shock, right? Hey, don't flush your toilet paper. You
yeah,
know.
yeah. No thanks. I'll pay the extra for the working flushable toilet.
Exactly.
What's the process for buying property in Mexico? Because I remember I did a trip to Croatia,
Mhm.
and when you buy property in Croatia, you never buy it. You get like a 100-year lease, and then the government gets it back after that, or you have to
Really?
basically buy it again because it's all nationalized. So, what is the actual property situation? Is it easy to buy land as a foreigner?
Yeah.
Is it expensive, cheaper? Like what's the deal?
I wouldn't say land is cheap for sure. We were looking at a plot that was like around 600 square meters, and like I'm not a metric person, but that's what I remember. I think it was around 2,000 square feet, maybe, and it was like 160,000 US.
Yeah.
So that's like not cheap, right? But I think other areas might be cheaper. It just depends because this area is, popular expat area. I will say, I think if you buy coastline places like on the beach, there's some rule about certain amount of kilometers from the ocean that is public. And so I think there's some weirdness with buying something on the beach that has to do with like that leasing thing, like you're talking about. I think it's similar to that. And then there's other areas, there's lands that are protected for indigenous. And so there's certain areas where you can only buy if you are like from that land.
Okay.
Even if you're a Mexico City Mexican and you move, you still wouldn't be able to buy certain land that was owned or that's like reserved for people
So
in
that's
that.
like our native,
Yeah,
reservations as well. There's plots like that. I don't.
yeah,
They're I guess maybe less common here, but there's still those same restrictions. Is if it's on
right,
on certain, you can't buy in a national park either, right? So there's
right,
restrictions everywhere you go.
right. But I think that's only one. And you just get a real estate agent. You do have to pay cash.
Oh,
It's another big
there's
difference.
so you can't mortgage like.
They have mortgages, but I think they're harder to get for expats, and I think they're pretty exorbitant, even higher than. what's happening down the States. No, like way higher. I'm not sure though.
That'd be interesting. I wonder if you could use like get some type of mortgage in the U.S. and then turn it to cash and bring it down. There's probably some workarounds there.
There
You'd have
probably
to.
is. What if you cashed out of your house and rented it and then took that cash and bought something here? If you had more
Yeah,
than one house, you know?
yeah. There's you gotta get a little creative. All right,
Yeah,
so I mean, it sounds cool living down there. If somebody
it is.
needs that friend in Mexico, what kind of how can you help them if somebody hears this and they're thinking about relocating? What kind of would be the process of working with you?
Yes, well, I have a new report which I'm going to give to you, and you'll be able to share it with your listeners. It's the 7 blunders Americans make when they make their move to Mexico.
Oh,
So, and
cool.
in that report has a ton of things to watch out for. The areas that we talked about are in that report. What else? A lot of stuff about schools, which I know is
Oh,
really important for people. I feel like there's a big gap in information you can find out there if you're a family that wants to move to Mexico. It's a lot of young expats and then a lot of retirees. And there's sort of a gap. Like, what do you do if you have kids? And maybe that holds people back. So there's a lot of information about that in there. And I'll give it to you as soon as it's ready. It's almost ready.
okay.
And I'm going to be helping people just with calls at first, helping you map it out, plan a trip, and get the lay of the land. So when you arrive here, it doesn't feel so foreign.
So if I wanted to come down and say visit 3 of those spots and just make a like family vacation out of it, like
Yeah.
is that a feasible way to go about exploring an area?
Yes. And I really want to help people do that because if you fly into Guadalajara, you can easily go to a couple other places from here, either by car or by a quick flight. Like you can get from Guadalajara to Puerto Vallarta in only a 30-minute flight. And it's like, less than $100 round trip to do that. And so it's a really easy thing to be able to go and see a couple of different places and decide from there.
You just brought up schools, and I gotta bring this up before we go, or
Yeah.
education. So, like,
Yeah.
my sister's a homeschooler. She homeschools her kids. I have a lot of friends that homeschool.
Yeah.
Are there a lot of homeschool kids down there? Are
Yeah.
there facilities that like? Well, I guess what is the general education situation?
Great question. So, by the way, I just listened to your education, well, your main education, like your rant episode, and I was just sitting
Oh,
there like agreeing with everything you said.
the dark
Um,
history of public schools.
yeah,
It's pretty scary.
it's very scary, and I've never been a public school. I've never been interested in it for a long time for my daughter. We never sent her to any of those. I went to them, right? I know what they're about, and so that was a big no for me. So we were already doing alternative style schools, and we played around with homeschool. Our daughter's an only child though, so I knew that she would want to be around other people. And so one thing I've noticed in Mexico is there are a lot of Montessori and Waldorf. Waldorf's a really big deal in Mexico. I find Waldorfs in all the major cities, like multiple of them.
Okay.
And tuition is so much more affordable than it is in the States. The Waldorf in my old area in Raleigh, North Carolina was in Chapel Hill, and I think the tuition was like 23,000 a year. And
Mhm.
here it's like 2,300 a year.
Wow,
Yeah,
that's enormous.
it's an enormous difference. And like what I love about Waldorf is it's very much so the attention to where the child is in their development personally and as a human, so much more than just dumping information onto you. So for me, it means everything because the way I view education is you can find out what you love and get all the information and learn it really quickly. You don't have to like by rote just learn all this stuff. Sure, you need to know basic math, basic reading and writing and everything, but a majority I feel like of school is a waste of time. But
Yeah.
if you don't agree with me on that front, there are very academically driven schools as well that are like international schools, and you can like there's a lot of English there, so the Mexican students that go there and learn English. But you could also, I've known expats who their kids have gotten fluent in Spanish there. But that was a big thing for me. I wanted my daughter to become fluent, and she is after 2 years. It's incredible.
Yeah, kids learn so much faster. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's
These
really
old
cool.
brains get all cloggy.
Totally.
Well, Tracy, this has been a lot of fun. Where can people find you right now? I will link to your report once you have
Yes.
that ready. So where can people find you right now if they want to get in touch and just even chat about the possibility of relocating and any logistics that they have particular to their situation?
Sure. Well, right now, my website is still being built. It's going to be afriendinmexico.com. But if you want to reach out right away, Instagram direct message is great. I'm at the Tracy Free. That's my tag because Friedlander. And then my friend used to call me Tracy Free. And I was like, I like that. I'm going to use it.
I like it too.
So that's what it is about Tracy Free, and DM me. Would love to talk to you.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. I learned a lot. And
Sweet. You got to come down, Henry.
I
Come
think
down
I do.
anytime.
I think I got to. All right, Tracy, thanks so much.
Thanks.
All right, everybody, that is our episode for the week. I've listed all the links to find Tracy in the description. To get her free report on the 7 mistakes Americans make on their move to Mexico, just go to the shortcut link henryb.co/Mexico. That's henryb.co/Mexico, and you can get some more information about Tracy on that site as well. All right, everybody, talk to you next week.